Welcome to the Center for Youth Wellness's training on adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress. This training consists of 5 modules covering neurobiology and brain architecture, the hormonal system, the immune system and metabolism, epigenetics, and research questions. We begin with neurobiology and brain architecture. During this module, you'll learn some basic neurobiology concepts. You'll learn about brain development and neuroplasticity, and why childhood intervention is so important. Understanding neuroplasticity is the key to understanding what we mean by the window of opportunity in child development. Neuroplasticity is the why we have hope for children who have been exposed to trauma and have experienced disruptions in their neural development. Remember, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to rewire itself. Dendritic pruning. If you've ever heard the phrase use it or lose it, then you understand a little bit about brain development and neuroplasticity. Throughout our life, we make more brain cells than we ultimately use. Through the process of dendritic pruning, cell connections either strengthen or die out and fall away, depending upon how much we use them. Not unlike a farmer pruning a tree, he cuts away the dead wood that isn't being used. Your brain participates in its own internal pruning process, getting rid of neurons and brain cells that aren't being used. The neurons and brain cells that are left over after the pruning process can become stronger with regular activity. This aspect of brain development is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity occurs from birth until early adulthood and aids in brain development. Neuroplasticity can be impacted by learning and memorizing new information as well as genetics and the environment, and can lead to long-lasting functional changes in the brain. There are 2 important types of neuroplasticity, cellular and synaptic. Cellular plasticity primarily occurs in the first 5 years of life and is mainly concerned with the number of neuronal connections we make. Synaptic plasticity happens throughout our lives and relates to the strength or weakness of brain connections. The most critical time for influencing brain architecture is in the first 5 years, when we can take advantage of both cellular and synaptic plasticity. However, the brain has capacity for plasticity throughout the lifespan, so it's never too late. A child's brain forms through experiences, and this process is called neuroplasticity. Let's take a few moments to go into this idea in more detail. Remember, a synapse in the brain is the connection point between 2 neurons, and this is the place where neurotransmitters like adrenaline flow. An adult's brain has 300 trillion synapses. A child's brain has a quadrillion synapses, or connections. A baby is born with 100 billion neurons, or brain cells. But those quadrillion synapses haven't been built yet. They haven't formed. They're formed by experiences. Those connections form at a very rapid speed during the first 5 years of life. They form at about 700 to 1,000 new synapses per second. Those connections are created through everyday interaction and are important because they form the architecture of the brain. So every time you talk to and engage a child, you are literally growing a brain, connecting the different parts of the brain which allow for new ideas, new insights, and creative thinking. Each moment, each eye contact, each new word exchanged, each time you make a child laugh, you're strengthening these connections. During these early years, a child's brain makes as many connections as possible, and then it begins pruning the ones that aren't used and strengthening the ones that are. This is neuroplasticity, a dynamic process that continues throughout one's lifespan. Overwhelmed children can experience changes in their brain structure. Since a child's brain is activated by everything it encounters, it can be overwhelmed by stress. When the brain experiences stress, the body's alarm system is activated. If the stress is relieved quickly by healthy caregiving, the body's system easily returns to normal. And while learning to deal with stress is an important part of development, severe situations such as ongoing abuse or neglect can leave the body's alarm system constantly activated, which can have serious lifelong consequences. This is known as toxic stress. Toxic stress can lead to a body system that's permanently on high alert. While the synapses we use for learning and self-control are pruned, the connections for fear and rash behavior can get stronger. Healthy interactions count. While the brain can change throughout the rest of life, these early years are fundamental in building a strong foundation for curiosity, creativity, and adaptability. Every interaction creates new connections in a child's brain. We can help children who live in tough environments to become curious, creative, and adaptable human beings. Childhood is a window of opportunity. Childhood is a period of rapid and sensitive brain development. During this sensitive period, combined with neuroplasticity, there's a window of opportunity to have a huge impact on a child's lifelong development. Let's take a look at the basics of brain structure and function. The brain has multiple parts that are responsible for different functions. All of these different parts of the brain communicate with each other via synapses. Synapses connect neurons from different parts of the brain so that different regions are interconnected. We'll talk about the different parts when we discuss how they're affected by stress. It's important to note that some parts of the brain have a direct effect on the body, not just the brain. One example of this is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus contains many specialized nuclei that help maintain basic physiological functions such as body temperature, blood pressure, fluid and electrolyte balance, and digestion. The hypothalamus also helps regulate complex behaviors like appetite, thirst, sleep, general arousal, and reproductive behaviors. In addition, it plays a role in emotional reactions, including anger and aggression. In other words, the hypothalamus takes care of the many necessary brain functions that occur without us having to think about or plan them. Amygdala. The amygdala is an almond-shaped structure of the brain that sits deep within the temporal lobe on each side of the brain. The amygdalae play a large role in our emotional and fear responses, and in particular, formation of memories associated with emotional experiences. Prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is considered the most evolved part of the brain. As the name implies, it's located at the very front part of the cortex, sitting just behind the forehead. It's responsible for complex decision-making and judgment, personality and social behavior, and judgment between conflicting thoughts, feelings, and intentions. This set of abilities is referred to as executive functioning. Locus coeruleus. The locus coeruleus is located in the brainstem and is the primary site where noradrenaline is created, one of the primary hormones in the stress response. The locus coeruleus regulates general states of being, including alertness and sleep-wake cycles, irritability, and attention. Hippocampus. The hippocampus is named for its shape. It looks like a seahorse. It's located on the edge of the cerebral cortex and is primarily involved in learning, short and long-term memory, and spatial navigation. The ventral tegmental area of the nucleus accumbens, also called the VTA, is located within the interior of the brain in front of the hippocampus. The VTA's function is related to reward and motivation and has many dopamine-related neurons or brain cells. The VTA also plays a role in processing other pleasing emotions and experiences such as love and sexual behavior. Insula. The insula is located deep within the brain between the temporal and parietal lobes on each side of the brain. The insula are responsible for our sense of bodily awareness, or noticing how our body feels internally. This could include non-painful warmth or coldness, the feeling of a full bladder, or gastric sensations. Have you ever opened an electrical panel or watched a telephone repair person open a junction box on the street? We take it for granted that the telephone works when we pick it up or the lights come on when we flick the switch. In order for either of these systems to work, there's a wiring system in place that sends electrical messages back and forth to make the light switch or phone work. Our brains, too, are a complex system. Chemicals, neurons, dendrites, neurotransmitters make up an amazing wiring system that has the ability to communicate across different regions of the brain. As we mentioned before, different sections of the brain have different functions. The brain's wiring system does a good job of communicating messages to tell each part of the brain what to do and when. The building blocks of the brain cells are called neurons. Each neuron is composed of three main parts: the cell body, axon, and dendrites. The cell body, which is the main portion of the cell, provides energy for the cell. This part of the cell is critical. If the cell body dies, the entire neuron dies. The next part of the cell is the axon. This long cable-like projection carries electrochemical messages along the length of the cell to the dendrites, or the last part of the cell. Dendrites are small branch-like projections that make connections between neurons and other cells, allowing them to talk with these other cells or perceive the environment. How brain signals are transmitted. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that float in between the synapse. An example of a neurotransmitter would be adrenaline. Neurons or brain cells communicate by passing chemical signals called neurotransmitters across the synapse. If you look here, you can imagine adrenaline rushing out to tell you to run if there's a gorilla chasing you. That concludes our module on neurobiology and brain architecture. We've discussed the basic building blocks of the brain function, namely neurons, neurotransmitters, and synapses. Neuroplasticity occurs throughout life, and childhood is a sensitive time, a window of opportunity to influence brain structure and function. Different structures have different interconnected functions over our physical, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral processes. And we also learn how connections in the brain are either strengthened or pruned based on various factors, a property called neuroplasticity. Thank you for participating in this training on neurobiology and brain architecture. Center for Youth Wellness, where health begins with hope.